Well, good afternoon, everybody. Good evening and good morning, wherever you are joining us from around the world. And welcome to the third day and the last session of this annual conference of CDDF. The planning committee decided on three themes that they wanted to focus on this year: collaboration, globalization, and involvement of patients in the entire pathway of developing drugs. And we've already in the past 2 days had a lot of discussion on all those themes and very positive information as well. Today's session is called Collaboration in the Post-COVID Regulatory Environment, and we're going to consider the lessons that have been learnt and some of the positive things from the pandemic. My name's John Smythe. I have the privilege of being the chair of the CDDF at the present time, and my co-moderator is Kim Lyerly, who will introduce himself in a moment or two. What we're going to do, we've got a slight change in the program. We're going to have 3 presentations, and then there was planned to have a half-hour coffee break and an hour's Q&A, but we've decided to have not to have the coffee break, given that this is the last session. So after 1 hour of presentations, we will go straight into the Q&A. And we very much hope that you'll all be able to stay on board and help us round up the meeting with that. Kim, can I hand over to you to introduce yourself?
Thank you, John. Again, it's a great pleasure to be here, and I think the spirit of cooperation is reflected on the agenda we have this afternoon. So thanks, John.
Without further ado, then, I think we can get straight into the program. And I'm delighted. Oh, we have, sorry, Kim, do you want to just explain the slides about the FDA situation?
Sure. I think the opportunity to have this discussion is really timely due to the fact that there's a set of events that are occurring even this week that reflect the importance of global discussion and harmonization. As many of you may know, a recent commentary in Lancet Oncology from the US FDA reflected on the global drug development and regulatory harmonizations with multi-regional clinical trials. Again, the sense that these types of studies needed further discussion. And again, we'll hear some reflections on the many mechanisms that enable this type of discussion. Next slide, please. But I think the more significant event will be an ODAC panel that will be held on the 10th of February, discussing an Orient 11 study, an anti-PD-1 monoclonal antibody study done for the treatment of lung cancer entirely in China. And this was, as you might expect, a clinically impactful product that seemed to have a significant benefit for these patients, and whether or not this body of evidence for study done from a single country outside of the US will be enabling for market entry is something that many of us are watching very, very closely, and the reflections and discussion on this will be an important set of facts and information and opinion for us all to consider in the year ahead. Thanks, Sean.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Kim. That sounds really very contemporary. It's a great privilege to introduce our first talk for this afternoon, which is called Boosting International Regulatory Collaboration. And there couldn't be anyone better to address this issue than Agnes Saint-Raymond. I've asked her permission to use the Anglophile rather than Agnès Saint-Raymond. She comes from the clinical trial department at BfArM and is their representative in the European Commission's expert group on clinical trials, and she was formerly head of International Affairs Division at EMA. So, Agnes, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm just going to present the views and the experience we had collected over the last 2 years in the COVID situation with international regulatory collaboration. So I would like to thank the organizers for inviting me and just highlight the fact that I'm presenting as an individual, and these are really personal views. My presentation is quite simple, and I want to highlight a few points over the history of what we did and the experience we collected. So first, we didn't start for COVID, we started before. We started in August 2018 when we discovered the contamination of some products, sartans initially, by a carcinogenic product, nitrosamines. Then we realized that this was an issue that affected many regulatory authorities, and it was in our best interest and the interest mostly of the patient around the world to communicate more actively than we normally do. So we created an informal group which shared inspection planning, inspection result, methods, tests, and results. And we discovered that this was quite effective and simplified, facilitated, and speeded up the result of this GMP inspection for nitrosamines. The secretariat was organized by Health Canada, but the idea came from EMA, and we had written in August 2018 to the US, to Canada, to Japan, saying, we cannot work in parallel. We have the same issues. We need to find the same solution. Just to give you a smile and a little idea of the benefit, one day, one regulatory authorities in the group decided that they informed us that they were going to do a surprise inspection of a manufacturing site. But another authority just highlighted the fact that on the same day, they had already planned a GMP inspection. So much so for the surprise inspection. So this is a kind of things, but it really was far more than that. It was also about sharing results, sharing data, sharing methods in order to have the same method to be able to compare our results. And really, that was the forerunner of what happened when COVID started. So at the beginning of 2019, when the pandemic was declared, we realized again that we needed to work together. Regulators are generally seen as, obstacles, slow, rigid. You can add a few characteristics like this, and generally not adaptable in terms of urgent situation. So that was also a challenge for us to demonstrate that we can work differently. What we did is we use an existing structure. That existing structure is ICMRA, difficult to pronounce. It's the International Coalition of Medicines Regulatory Authorities. This was an existing group that had been created in 2012 and was already had 27, 29 members, and voluntary group, strategic in nature, trying to identify common issues and common solutions. The topics we had addressed so far were AMR. We had a few meetings twice a year. We had the presentation in the DIA. We had issued a statement on AMR, but honestly, apart from the members, nobody knew about ICMRA. But we used that structure from the outset, and we had the first meeting of using ICMRA in February 2019. So you see that regulators really went immediately and realized immediately that international collaboration was important. At the time, ICMRA was chaired by EMA, which also helped, and my division was doing the secretariat of the ICMRA. So we were also leading in terms of organization and collaboration. You have here the list of members as of to date, with the associate members which are on their way to become members. And you can see that you have not only the EU, but a number of member states, but you have the main large authorities that are actually looking at development plan. So the issue is, because COVID was the same issue for everybody, the same disease, the same pandemic, we knew that the therapeutics and the vaccine would be the same for everybody. So the international collaboration made a lot of sense, and the urgency facilitated the collaboration, because Nobody wanted to be left out. And we knew that a single development plan would be the solution and the way forward. So the first meeting under ICMRA was a workshop on the non-clinical characteristic of the development of vaccine. It took place in February 2019 and was followed by many others. Every time we changed the chairs. We had different chairs. FDA was co-chairing with EMA for vaccine. Japan was also in charge of the treatment, and Canada worked on real-world evidence. So these meetings were also involving actively other authorities. Nobody was left out. Everybody was able to contribute, intervene, and participate. And I think that is also a very important lesson of ICMRA. By considering everybody as a valued participant, it motivated. So I can see the benefits of ICMRA, and I will repeat that over this presentation. The main benefit of ICMRA were the consensus that we were able to build quickly, easily. And second was the communication. Through these meetings, we kept every single member informed of what was going on. And we realized on that occasion that normally regulatory authorities don't share information and don't update each other. So ICMRA was the way of providing this information. The workshop were technical. So as I said, vaccines, we had other meetings on vaccines, on the clinical evidence, the effectiveness, and we agreed immediately. It was not difficult to agree. So the consensus was built very easily, but every participant had that information in real time during the meeting, but also because we published the outcome of the meeting immediately in the couple of days afterwards. So it was really information that was disseminated immediately. And as I said, it was very useful. We had other activities in ICMRA where also we involved other regulatory authorities. The other type of meeting, we had a working group, which was working on small topics and produced statements, which we published, for example, on sharing data, on the need for placebo-controlled trial or large trials and not small trials that are underpowered. We had also an update every other week. We met for 1 or 2 hours and we updated each other on what were the hot topics, which trial was completed or ongoing, what were the products under development. And this permanent information allowed everybody to have the same level of information. So it was really important in terms of sharing information and then building consensus. We agreed, as I said, on most things very easily. There was one element where we did not fully agree, which was on the acceptable, from the regulatory perspective, acceptable vaccine effectiveness. And the FDA wanted 50%. EMA was ready to accept a little lower. Of course, we didn't know at the time that we would get 95%, which solved every single problem immediately. But it's just to show that we had slight difference, but they were not essential. And on the essential criteria, we did agree. So this is quite positive and show that in reality, regulators were able to work together very quickly. So we had this double benefit of consensus quickly, and this was acceptable and achievable because we didn't have any other stakeholders. I'm normally a great supporter of patient participation and integration in whatever we do, or academics, of course. But in that particular case, having regulators only allowed to be quite quick. This ICMRA is an informal group. I said it's strategic, it's voluntary. There was no process, there was no heavy and slow process. Maybe look at ICH, the International Council on Harmonization, which normally would be the place where you would expect some regulatory guidance on how to develop a product. ICH remained silent during the COVID in terms of contribution to COVID development. because ICH takes years to produce a guideline. So it's a very good guideline, it's been consulted, it's been discussed, but it's impossible for ICH to adapt to the urgency we had. Whereas an informal group with agile in its nature was able to deliver. So I think it's a lesson also on, in terms of what do we want to achieve, what is the most important. That doesn't mean we should not consult and we should not involve patient or academics or pharmaceutical industry, of course. But in order for regulators to be really effective, they needed that sort of safe harbor, this forum where they could discuss very quickly what they wanted to say. So what else did we do? We also had these working groups. We have worked on, for example, regulatory agilities or regulatory flexibilities. Agilities is less of a bending the rules, it's more. But what we're trying to do at present is to distinguish between what was used during a crisis and what is acceptable or what is not acceptable. Some of the things were lowering the standards, and we don't want that. Some things are typically specific of emergency and crisis and are not going to be used outside of the crisis. But some of the, not shortcuts, but the speedier access, the different way of approaching some of the situation could probably stay and be used in the future. So we have realized again that crises are a fantastic opportunity. In addition to being a catastrophe from the societal, economic, human, it's a catastrophe, but at the same time, it produces a situation where you can innovate, when you can be creative, where you're forced to do things differently, and maybe to get rid of the thing that holds you back. And that is why I love crisis. But so we are now in a situation where we're analyzing what we should keep to make our work better, faster, more effective, with less resources, and at the same time, not accept to lower the standards. So this is what the transition we are doing now beyond COVID, although COVID, as you know, is not finished. But of course, ICMRA was not the only way to work in COVID, and EMA has innovated in a different way as well. We have created the Open Initiative. And I know other aspect, the two other initiatives will be described later on, which are Orbis and Access. But I want to talk about Open and to contrast it a little bit with Access and Orbis. So Open was created, again, informally with Health Canada starting to work on Remdesivir, where we invited informally Health Canada to be part of the CHMP, the Committee for Human Medicinal Product, which works on the scientific opinion for marketing authorization. And Health Canada enjoyed and was invited as a participant in the scientific discussion, in the scientific evaluation. Again, this is not with the idea of having a single assessment. It's more to bring different assessment towards being enriched by having different views, maybe identifying different issues. You know that in Europe, we always have two rapporteurs with exactly that objective, that two teams don't see the same thing. They bring different issues and they bring different explanation and different approaches. And the two together are richer than just one. So we wanted to have this addition, and Open was formalized in December 2019. And we have now invited Health Canada, Swissmedic, WHO. Japan has also joined, and Australia in a second step. So, and these countries are able to contribute to the scientific evaluation of the product. So this is really important. And they are treated as peers. So they can take whatever they want and they can bring whatever they want to the discussion. And they are really part of the evaluation. And I think this is a very positive element. To show you the effectiveness and the success, just to let you know that WHO, who is part of this exercise, has used the evaluation of the AstraZeneca Oxford vaccine, Vaxzevria, and use that assessment to which they participated in order to make the EUL, the emergency use listing, which was then used by more than 100 countries within 2 weeks to issue an authorization for the AstraZeneca vaccine, which is really what has been used in most low and middle income countries. So this is evidence of the success and the practical implementation of regulatory collaboration. We have other ways of collaborating. We have done a joint inspection with WHO in some areas where it was difficult and we had the same product. We also had, just to give you an example, taking into consideration the pandemic and the incapacity to travel, we have one authority inspecting locally and connected to EMA and another authority far remote, contributing, having a joint inspection remotely. So we have mix of in situ inspection, GMP inspection, and remote inspection. And to contrast this open, I'm going back to open, to contrast open with Orbis and Access. Orbis is, as you know very well, because it's oncology, the initiative of the Center of Excellence in Oncology. And they have shared their assessment in real time with other authorities, Canada, UK, and Australia. And they work intensively between assessors on the assessment. But the principle is that the FDA can provide whatever the others want, but will not take what the other countries are producing, which is not what we do in open. We accept that the other come with their assessment report and we will take the best of it. And access is a situation where the actual application is split, and each country, which is Australia, Canada, Singapore, UK, are splitting the application, and each authority is assessing one part, and at the end they take a common decision on the product. So really a different approach of international collaboration when it comes to regulatory work, but it is really interesting to see they are complementary forms and every one of each of them has an interest. So my message is really use the opportunity of exceptional circumstances to collaborate. And by that, I mean work together as peers. And that is the real way. I'm not suggesting, again, that we don't work with stakeholders, industry, academics, but first and foremost, patient. On the contrary, but we need to find ways which are lighter, more agile, and faster. So this is not something that we reject because it's taking too much time, but it's actually helping. So I wanted to show you the open initiative as well, but you have heard me. And so how does this apply to oncology? And that will be my conclusion and my last slide. I think the lessons learned are real-time communication on issues and bringing everybody to the table. It's more difficult, the more you are, the more difficult it is. But at the same time, I think if there is a willingness to engage, it will produce the result that you want. We've seen with ICMRA that not everybody contributes to the same level. We had members who were very much listening, much more than bringing issues or bringing questions. But over time, you see, depending on the topic, suddenly you see one of these authorities that you could say maybe is a bit asleep, suddenly waking up and contributing on a particular topic. We always ask for volunteers for any topic, and we had the surprise to see maybe the authorities that were not expected. We had a mix. We had, as you could see, the continents except Antarctica, all of them. We had a mix of developed countries and low and middle income countries. We asked WHO as an observer, which was really good. So we have been really engaging with different levels, different ways, but all over the time we had this willingness to work together. So probably prioritization is also an important aspect. The crisis made it clear, but we wanted also to serve the other areas which are not COVID and making sure that our resources are not divested from these areas, because that would have affected the patient. So there are a number of points, and I'll be happy to discuss later on what else we can do. But I think it shows that it is possible to work. Regulators are not as rigid as we can imagine. And in practice, this is effective and had a real impact, as I've tried to demonstrate. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Agnes. That was terrific. And again, a great set of examples of international collaboration, particularly the mention of the Project Orbis from the FDA. We're very fortunate to have Angelo De Claro, who will be presenting the Project Orbis experience. Angelo is currently the Associate Director of the Global Clinical Services with the U.S. FDA Oncology Center of Excellence, headed by Rick Pasder. Again, the Project Orbis initiative really is focused on oncology and led by the Oncology Center of Excellence, but I think represents an exciting example of international collaboration and harmonization that is likely to have and will continue to have the significant impact on the development of oncology products. Angela?
Greetings. Thank you for the organizers for inviting FDA to present at this conference to provide you an update on Project Orbis. Dr. Rick Pasder and I have presented at this conference before to discuss Project Orbis. Dr. Pasder initially in 2020 to give an overview of the program. And I presented last year and here again today to provide you an update on the progress on Project Orbis. Just to provide you an overview, Project Orbis is a program of the FDA Oncology Center of Excellence, or the OCE. The OCE fosters a unified interaction between the three FDA centers, and this was established in January of 2017. OCE was authorized by the 21st Century Cures Act, and this is the first FDA Intercenter Institute. Within OCE, we work closely with various therapeutic centers within FDA. The first is the Center for Biologics, where we work with Office of Tissues and Advanced Therapies. And this is the organization that regulates CAR T and other cellular therapies, gene therapy, and vaccines. Center for Drugs, or CDER, is where Office of Oncologic Diseases is located. And this office regulates small molecules, monoclonal antibodies, antibody drug conjugates, and other large molecules. Then we also have Center for Devices, for which we have the Office of In Vitro Diagnostics and Radiological Health. And this center regulates companion and complementary diagnostics. It's been 5 years since OCE was established. And approvals since that time is noted here. There have been, OCE has supported approval of 76 new molecular entities, also known as new active substances or new drug substances, and also an additional 185 new indications. And these are all for oncology. The average review time is about 6 months. This workload of about 250 plus approvals over the past 5 years, I think reflects the highly active area in oncology drug development. One can see the challenges that this could pose for regulatory authorities who have to deal with this large workload. Also, another consideration would be the hematology-oncology providers have to be aware of all of these rapid developments in the field. FDA has multiple expedited programs to help prioritize the workload and to get the therapies available to patients. These traditional programs include Fast Track, Breakthrough Therapy, Priority Review, and Accelerated Approval. The first three programs are designations, whereas Accelerated Approval is a separate approval pathway. The qualifying criteria are shown here, and all require the condition to be serious. For fast track, non-clinical or clinical data to demonstrate potential to address unmet need would be the criteria. For breakthrough therapy, we have preliminary clinical evidence demonstrating substantial improvement over available therapies. For priority review, if approved, would result in significant improvement in safety or efficacy. And accelerated approval requires demonstration of an effect on an endpoint reasonably likely to predict clinical benefit over available therapies. The timing of submission is shown in the next row, and the key features are shown on the bottom row. Fast Track is designed to expedite development and review through granting meetings, and also allows for rolling review. Breakthrough Therapy allows for intensive development, guidance, and organizational commitment. And this is what we refer to as the all hands on deck approach. Priority review, the timelines are shown here. For new molecular entities, the priority review timeline is 8 months versus 12 months for standard review. And for supplemental applications for new indications, it's 6 months for priority review and 10 months for standard review. Accelerated approval, besides the being based on an endpoint that is likely to predict clinical benefit. Accelerated approval, we have also required post-marketing requirements to be completed to verify clinical benefit. The several traditional FDA expedited programs I described evolve over a period of time, and this would be the reason why there is some overlap between these programs. This slide shows the historical context of the FDA and OCE programs. Accelerated approval and priority review were enacted in 1992, Fast Track designation in 1997, and Breakthrough Therapy designation in 2012. Here's some of FDA oncology metrics for these traditional expedited programs. For accelerated approval, 84% of FDA accelerated approvals from 2010 to 2019 were for oncology indications. Priority review designation from 2015 to 2020, about 80 to 90% of oncology approvals use priority review, 88% of new molecular entity approvals, and 82% for new indication approvals. For breakthrough therapy designation in 2020, 40% of the Center for Drugs breakthrough therapy designations were for oncology indications. These bullets indicated that oncology is a major user of these expedited programs. Nevertheless, OCE felt a need to develop additional programs to further facilitate the submission and review of oncology applications. Hence, in 2018, OCE launched Real-Time Oncology Review, RTOR, and Assessment Aid, followed by Project Orbis in 2019. And I'll show more details of these programs in the next slide. One of the advantages of OCE being a standalone center is that OCE was able to rapidly implement these programs once the initial framework was set. This slide provides a summary of the OCE review programs. We have Real-Time Oncology Review starting in 2018. It has an objective to increase the efficiency of review through earlier submission of critical efficacy and safety data. The key element would be early submission of data sets. Qualifying criteria include substantial improvement over available therapy, straightforward study designs, and well-understood endpoints. Assessment Aid was developed the same year, and the objective of the Assessment Aid is to focus the review on critical assessment and decrease the administrative time of copying and pasting with the applicant's submissions. Key element would be the Assessment Aid is a template with distinct sections for data, applicant position, and FDA assessment. Qualifying criteria for assessment aid includes any oncology drug application. Project Orbis was launched in May of 2019 with the objective of facilitating faster patient access to innovative cancer therapies in participating countries. Key elements include direct collaboration between FDA and partner countries. Qualifying criteria for Project Orbis would be high impact and clinically significant applications. FDA Oncology Global Collaboration has a long history. This began in 2004 with the European Medicines Agency, where we have monthly teleconferences to discuss application-specific issues as well as general topics for discussion. This oncology cluster has been expanded to other regulatory authorities, including Canada, Japan, Australia, and Switzerland. FDA noted at these teleconferences that FDA received the application first, followed by EMA, after about 6 months, and that it was not unusual for the other countries to experience delays with submission of the applications. Could be 1 year, 2 years, or some may not even receive the application. Hence, OCE launched Project Orbis in 2019. This was conceived as a collaborative review program, but it also aims to facilitate the earlier submission of applications to the partner countries. The current participating countries, which we term as Project Orbis partners, include Australia, Brazil, Canada, Israel, Singapore, Switzerland, and the United Kingdom. What are the requirements for Project Orbis countries? First is that confidentiality agreement with all other Orbis countries. The application submission should be in the English language with inclusion of a sponsor authorization letter to share information across the Orbis countries. And the regulatory authorities should be available to participate in meetings, which could include product-specific meetings, as well as general meetings, which we call board meetings that occur on a quarterly basis to discuss the administrative aspects of the program. Some of these requirements have proved to be a challenge for participation for some countries. For example, Japan, we have reached out to Japan PMDA, and they declined participation in Orbis because they require the applications to submit it in the Japanese language. The setup for initiation of a new project, of a new country to Project Orbis is also includes setup of several meetings, typically 3 to 4 meetings to orient the new country to the framework for Project Orbis. We also discuss our respective regulatory frameworks because it's important to understand our current frameworks for approvals and application submissions to have a better collaborative working relationship. Overview of the program. FDA serves as the primary coordinator for Project Orbis. And again, the plan is for concurrent or near concurrent submissions across the participating countries. The assessment aid, which is one of OCE's programs, is the primary review document for FDA and serves as the core reference document for Orbis countries. The review includes the addition of multi-country teleconferences, generally about 2 to 3 per application. Importantly, each country retains full independence in regulatory decision and labeling negotiations. Project Orbis types, we have designated these as types A to C, and these are classified according to the submission gap and difference with the FDA review timeline. And I will discuss this in the next table. Project Orbis types. Initially, when we designed Project Orbis, we were thinking of type A submission pathways, where this was the regular Orbis, wherein there would be concurrent submission, concurrent review, concurrent action, You have the multi-country teleconferences and the sharing of the assessment aid. And this was true with year one of the program, where 70% of the submissions to the Orbis partners were type A submissions. As the workload has increased, we've noticed an increase to more of the type B and type C submissions. And these were designed to handle the particular scenarios that were faced, which include sponsor or the applicant not being able to concurrently submit, or potentially also the regulatory authorities may not have the resources to accept the workload under Project Orbis. So we have type C, which is Orbis written report only, where this allows for sharing the assessment aid. And these would be applications where an FDA has already taken action on the application. As you can see here, there's minimal interaction for this type of Project Orbis. Type B, also known as modified Orbis, is sort of is our Project Orbis submissions that are in between type A and type C, wherein concurrent action with the FDA is typically not possible, but there could be opportunities based on the amount of review time overlap for having multi-country teleconferences and concurrent review of the FDA with the FDA. And all of these types allow for sharing of the FDA assessment. Key features of Project Orbis. Project Orbis leverages the FDA staffing and expertise with application review. Just to give you an idea, current FDA oncology staff, we have about 250 plus full-time staff just to deal with oncology drug applications. Our staff include about 100 plus clinicians, including 100 hematologists, oncologists. We have complement of statisticians, clinical pharmacologists, non-clinical experts, as well as project managers to help support the program. FDA has 17 disease-specific teams, and they're shown here. The FDA review provides for independent multidisciplinary assessment, including full review of datasets. Please note that Project Orbis is not a work-sharing initiative. And again, each country retains independent decision-making for each application. This figure provides for Project Orbis 2-year update. The slide shows the numbers from year one. So your year one experience, there were 68 submissions leading to, and there were 32 regulatory actions taken in that first year. You can see with year two, there's been approximately twofold growth in the program with increase in the number of submissions as well as regulatory actions. And this is through the middle of 2021. The breakdown of the submitted applications and regulatory actions taken according to countries shown here on the table. Israel Ministry of Health is not included in this figure because they joined the program in July of 2021. Additional highlights. The submission gap to FDA continues to be at the median of 1 month, and the regulatory action gap varies according to Project Orbis type. Currently, the overall median remains at about 3 months. So summary of Project Orbis year two experience, workload. There's been a twofold increase in year two submission workload compared to year one. We have noticed also that there's an increase in proportion of type B and type C submissions. Previously in year one, these were a total of about 30%. Now you can see that about 50 to 60% of the applications are type Bs and type Cs. And our thinking is this probably reflects, again, the challenges with concurrent from the applicant side, as well as on the regulatory authority side for the increased workload in Project Orbis. New molecular entities, also known as new active substances and new drug substances, comprise about 32% of the workload. About a third of the FDA oncology workload is being referred to Project Orbis. Because of the increased workload, we've also needed to conduct a few process changes to streamline the program. The Orbis teleconferences have been changed to an issue-based discussion format, and we've reduced the number of meetings as it becomes more challenging to schedule multiple meetings when you're dealing with several applications at the same time. And finally, the assessment aid is shared at the conclusion of the FDA review. Previously, the process allowed for an iteration of comments and edits from the partner countries. However, due to the increased workload, we felt that the assessment aid would best be served to serve as the FDA review final assessment, and the Orbis partners or Project Orbis partners can use this document as they consider fit for their review. What have been the challenges with Project Orbis from its implementation? I think I have a few bullets here. First is future expansion to other countries. Currently, there are 8 Project Orbis countries, including the US. We have received queries from other countries throughout the world, and currently, due to workload and resource considerations, we have not been able to expand further to other countries. At some point, having too many countries becomes more very logistically challenging in regards to scheduling of meetings, for example. Other challenges for some countries wishing to join would include the lack of a confidentiality agreement that's required to be present with each Orbis partner. Next challenge I'd like to discuss is co-approval with diagnostic tests. We know that several oncology therapeutic approvals require diagnostic tests to identify the population for the drug. And early on with the program, we had reached out to our Center for Devices to talk about, well, could Project Orbis be expanded to include the diagnostic tests? And while we've had those initial discussions, I think the primary challenge encountered with this was that the framework is just so different across the several countries under Orbis. FDA would have the most, I think, stringent framework with the requirement for co-approval of the tests, whereas other countries typically would deal with these with identification of the respective diagnostic tests through labeling. So these major differences in the framework did not make it amenable for inclusion of the diagnostic tests under Project Orbis. Some countries are in the process of developing a framework similar to FDA with regards to requirements for co-approval of diagnostic tests. And we'll have to see how those frameworks shape up and see whether they would fit under Project Orbis. Advanced therapies has been another area that I think we had looked into. So this would include therapies, complex drug therapies that include radiopharmaceuticals, which include assessments of other agencies that might, for example, deal with radiation safety. And we have, of course, your cellular therapies like CAR T therapies with its complex manufacturing issues. Today, these have not been included to Project Orbis due to the complexities for the development and approval for these products. I think we are continuing to work with our colleagues with Center for Biologics to streamline the review process and hopefully open advanced therapies for Project Orbis in the future. The figure here shows the Project Orbis graphic. Again, I think overall, FDA OCE has been very happy with the progress of Project Orbis. As of the end of December 2021, a total of 150 regulatory actions have taken place with supported by Project Orbis. And this certainly shows really the growth of this program. And certainly this would be consistent with OCE's mission to enhance regulatory decision-making and through innovation and collaboration. I would be happy to discuss with the group regarding your thoughts and any suggestions regarding Project Orbis. I'll end here. I also would like to thank all of the participants in Project Orbis, including the FDA teams that continue to support this program. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Angelo, for a superb presentation. And you and Dr. Pazdura to be congratulated on developing this very impressive program, particularly dealing with such a large workload. It's a wonderful reflection on the progress of modern science that we have so many new entities to discuss, but it obviously is putting a huge burden on regulators around the world. It'll be good to discuss this in the Q&A later on. Our third presentation in this session is on Swissmedic, current status and future considerations on international regulatory collaborations. And we're very pleased to have Ulrich Peter Ruhr from Swissmedic, who is a professor of hematology and oncology at the University of Freiburg. Ulrich, the stage is yours.
So I would like to thank the organizers to invite me to the annual meeting and to give a presentation on Swissmedic's view on international collaborations. Before I come to the present time, I would like to start with a historical view on international collaborations, and I would call it the cluster collaboration concept. In this type of collaboration, different agencies came together to exchange their views and perspective on specific scientific topics. In the context of medical product review, the clusters were specific to disease areas, and agencies discussed very concrete medical product applications within that disease area. The very first cluster was founded back in 2004 for hematology and oncology, and the two founding agencies were FDA and EMA. This very successful cluster existed ever since, and it has grown also to 4 additional agencies that have joined, which were Canada, Japan, Australia, and Switzerland. Meanwhile, reaching present times, there are additional 30 clusters that are taking place in parallel in all fields of disease areas, drug development plans, guidelines, or other scientific topics. Next to the cluster collaborations of the past that have transmitted to the present, there are 2 new concepts that have emerged that are worth mentioning here. The first concept is the parallel review concept. Here, different agencies work independently in parallel on a drug application. They share their views in joint meetings during the ongoing assessment of the drug. The aim is not to have the same outcome for the decision-making, but have a clear view on the benefits, risks, and uncertainties of the application. Based on that same baseline of knowledge, each agency takes an independent decision and action. The second is the reliance concept. Here, different independent agencies decide amongst each other who will take the lead on the assessment for a given drug application. This particular leading agency will make the assessment, and the others rely or peer the assessment of the leading agency. Depending on the strategic setup of that collaboration, the others may follow the recommendation of the lead agency. And this is a true work-sharing model approach. For the parallel review concept, Project Orbis is the prototype, and you heard about this a lot from my former speaker, Angelo. The strategic imperative of Orbis was that the data for the application are submitted at the same time to FDA and smaller agencies in order to reduce the submission gap so that more patients would have faster access to innovative cancer treatments. For the reliance concept, the EMA rapporteur-co-rapporteur approach is an example that comes to mind. Another example is the work-sharing model of the Access Consortium between 5 agencies that I will discuss in a bit. So now we turn to Swissmedic. Swissmedic is the Swiss Agency for Therapeutic Products. And Swissmedic participates in both of these international collaborations, Project Orbis and the Access Consortium. So why do we at Swissmedic collaborate here? We do that because it's the perfect match for Swissmedic into its strategic objectives. In total, we have 7 strategic objectives in the currently given time frame. And 2 of them in particular are related to international collaboration. The first strategic objective is relevant in the sense of international collaboration, is basically the acceleration of time-critical processes to meet the expectation of patients to have access to innovative therapies as a fast authority which perfectly fits into Project Orbis. The second strategic objective is what we at Swissmedic use, a work-sharing approach and rely on other authorities, which also fits very nicely to the Access Consortium approach. So let's turn to Project Orbis first. It started in 2020 at Swissmedic as a pilot, a 1-year pilot. And in 2021, we had to decide whether or not Project Orbis is successful and if Project Orbis would be then implemented into the Swissmedic process. So what makes Orbis successful for Switzerland? Well, it's a very easy answer. Orbis is successful if more patients would have access to innovative cancer treatments in Switzerland. And there are 2 options how an assessment can be accelerated. Either the submission gap, so the submission date between the FDA and Swissmedic, can be shortened, or the drug assessment time can be shortened. If both elements are shortened, then this would lead to a faster receiving and approval of an application. As a consequence, a faster availability of innovative cancer drugs would be there for patients. And before I come to the results of Orbis in Switzerland, I would like to share the number of applications so far performed. So as of today, we have received and done 31 submissions, and the numbers are clearly rising between 2020 and 21. So we have completed 18 applications, 12 are in assessment, and we have accepted an additional 1. And it's of interest that about 1/3 of the applications were in new active substances, while 2/3 were indication extensions. So when we talk about Project Orbis, there are different Orbis types available, and we have basically defined those. Angelo has explained it in his talk as well, but I would like to remind again on the differences of the different types. So the type A is a true parallel review where the submission gap is below 30 days. Conferences are scheduled between the Orbis partners and the FDA, and the scientific issues are discussed. And of course, there is no FDA approval at that time. Type B, called modified Orbis, here the submission gap is longer. It can be very variable. It can be 31 days, could be longer than that. And normally there are also conferences scheduled between the Orbis partners and the FDA. The approval time is variable. Very often FDA has not approved yet and takes action during or at a later stage. Type C is very different from the other type A and B. This is a report sharing only. So the assessment report of the FDA is shared with the Orbis partner. Here the submission gap is way longer than 30 days. Normally there are no conferences scheduled and FDA has approved already this application. So these types are important to understand. If we now come to the results for Switzerland on Project Orbis. We first look at the submission gap. So when we want to see if there was a change on the submission gap, we first of all have to set a baseline. And we calculated basically, and our colleagues from SILS set the benchmark here. We calculated the Swissmedic submission gap for a 5-year time period and compared that then to the submission gap of all Orbis applications we so far have received. And as you can see, there's a great reduction by over 70% in the submission gap in Switzerland when using Orbis as compared to the time before when we did not use Orbis. And breaking it down to the different types of application, it can be seen that the greatest reduction in terms of submission gap is seen for Orbis A types. It is also present, but to a lesser degree for type B. And there is virtually no benefit any longer and no reduction in submission gap when we look at Orbis type C. Coming now to the drug assessment times in Orbis. So we have in Switzerland for all different regulatory pathways, different timelines. Taking those together, we set them now as 100% and compare them to the completed Orbis projects assessments. And as you can see, we were in fact faster by 33% performing Orbis. And again, what you also have observed for the submission gap, the reduction of the assessment times is different for Orbis A, B, and C. The greatest reduction was seen in type A. The B was intermediate with minus 20%. And for type C, there was virtually no huge benefit in terms of reduction of assessment time. The largest benefit in Orbis type A is due to the fact that we do, during the assessment, directly information requests, so rolling questions towards the companies, which is not a normal Swissmedic procedure. And that led to a great reduction, the great reduction that we observed by almost 40% for type A applications. So I hope I could show you that we were able to reduce the submission gap with Orbis as well as the drug assessment time. And therefore, the project Orbis, this pilot, was successful for Swissmedic. And therefore, we have implemented Orbis completely to Swissmedic processes. So now shift gears and come to the Access Consortium. The strategic objective of Access is a work-sharing approach. There are 5 agencies at the Access Consortium, which are Australia, Canada, Singapore, Switzerland, and very recently, UK joined us due to Brexit. For the different submitted data modules, one agency is in the lead and does the assessment for the other agencies. The other agencies peer the assessment of the lead agency, and the questions to the company are jointly developed. After Access received the answers from the applicant, the lead agency formulates then the benefit risk conclusion, And in most cases, the other agency comes to the same benefit risk conclusion as the lead agency. It should be noted, however, that it's important that each agency remains fully independent in their decision making. Within access, there are different work streams combined. We have the work stream, for example, for new active substances. That also includes indication extension. There's the generic medicine work stream, the biosimilar work stream, as well as a COVID work stream. There are also others, but I would like to concentrate on the first one, new active substances, the new active substances working group. So in total, we have done at Swissmedic 17 submissions so far. We've completed 7, 8 are in assessment, and 2 are lined up in pipeline. It is important to stress that the majority of those applications were in for new active substances. Now, looking at the completed ones, we see a significant increase from 2020 to 2021. It's also interesting to see that only one application was in hematology and oncology, while the others were scattered around other disease areas. So let's come to the assessment time. And first of all, Swissmedic has a regular assessment time for applications, but so do all access partners have their own access time. So the access NAS working stream, when coming together, have basically formulated an agreed access assessment timeline. And this I have put as 100%. And now the 7 applications, they stayed in the agreed assessment time as depicted here. Because you could envision that potentially due to the collaborations, the questions, the telephone conferences, there might be delays, but this was in fact not the case. So in summary, one can conclude for Swissmedic, these were very successful international collaborations, and they will be continued in the future. Allow me one last word, looking to the future. So I have covered the past and the present, but how does the future look like? And my personal belief is that there will be a coexistence between all 3 mentioned collaborations. So we will have the cluster collaboration concept, the parallel review concept, the reliance concept. But what we might see in the future are additional hybrid concepts between the parallel concept and the reliance concept. Certain agencies are legally obliged to always perform an independent review. They will never qualify for a reliance concept, and the FDA is an example. But the parallel concept, this would qualify for these kind of agencies. So there will be a lead agencies, and other agencies will follow the lead agency by reliance. The degree of these hybrid concepts that we might see in the future depend on 3 things. Firstly, the country-specific legal situation. Secondly, the strategic focus of the agency, if there's interest in international collaborations. And lastly, the experiences of the agency with these types of collaborations. And with that, I thank you for listening, and I'm happy to take any questions in the breakout, and let's have a good discussion there. Thank you very much.
Ulrich, thank you very much indeed for a really splendid talk. Let me hand over to Kim Langley to begin the Q&A session, because he's prepared a question that we're going to vote on. Kim.
Thanks, John. Again, I really echo the compliments to all of our speakers this afternoon. But we thought we'd start the discussion with question really related to the recent request for NODAC meeting and the commentary from Pazder et al. From the Office of Oncology, Center for Oncology Excellence and so forth. And, you know, the specific review of single country study, of course, China being a quite large country, and whether or not that would be appropriate for regulatory action in the U.S. The specific question for us is the knowledge of that meeting and the outcome of that meeting and its impact on our European colleagues and the regulatory activities, strategies, et cetera. So if you can ask yourself, how would the emerging developments about multi-country studies impact your regulatory and clinical development strategies globally or within the EU? That would be great. Looks like we're getting responses back, and it obviously has a significant impact on the global focus, of course. But still, there is some impact on the EU focus, which again perhaps presages the discussion we're having today about the international collaborations. John?
I think that's very interesting. Thank you very much indeed. Let's open this up now for a general discussion. You've had 3 excellent presentations. And I might take the moderator's privilege of starting this. I think I understand. I mean, the first thing to say is it's absolutely wonderful to have so many options, but it must be quite a challenge for individual companies when they have a marketing application to know either which pathway to aim for or which pathway they might be given. And can I start by asking Agnes, and possibly Angelo will want this as well. I don't quite understand, with the EMA's open program that you described, Agnes, is that not actually competing with Orbis? Have I missed something there? It looks to me as though it competes.
Thanks for the question. Actually, John, no, it's not really competing. I think it's actually complementary. First, Orbis is about oncology, and what has been done with Open was COVID. So definitely we're not in the same therapeutic area. As the principle, as I said, is that all partners will be treated as peers, so they can contribute. They're not just receiving, they are actually investing, and they have to assess. So it's parallel assessment. In fact, join at the end for a scientific discussion. And then, of course, every single decision is independent, because we all have legal structures that do not allow simply to rely completely on another authority's decision. But for me, it's absolutely complementary rather than a competing. I want to say 2 points there. I think one is single assessment for me is not the way forward in the long run, because I think we benefit from having different views. Like when you have an article submitted to a journal, you send it to several peer reviewers. You don't just give it to one. You want to have different views and different analysis. So I think having more than one assessment is quite important. And second, I think we will always struggle with all these processes with confidentiality. It's a bit on the side track, but I think it's an important point. We have inherited from the past the fact that applications are confidential, and between regulators, we're not going to discuss commercial aspects. We're not sharing information for a competing, copying or whatever. We are doing that for the benefit of public health, and we should be free of these confidentiality requirements, because they are hindering public health. And I think that's an important point that needs to be addressed in the near future. Otherwise, we are not addressing the real issues. So again, I think there are complementary systems, same as access is complementary because it is based on a different system. Over.
Okay, thank you very much. That's very helpful. one of the biggest challenges that I have appreciated for years now, and a difference between EMA and FDA, is that in Europe there are 26 plus one different countries, and the actual access to medicines after regulatory approval is up to the individual countries. And is there any, with all these options for different ways, and indeed many countries out with Europe having a part to play, for example, in the access program, what are your thoughts about any way we can get more harmonization about the actual uptake once people have been through this accelerated, well, I won't use the word accelerated, but this speeded up process of drug development?
It's a very good question. I think there are a lot of initiatives ongoing to do exactly that. In particular, a joint review with health technology assessors, which are looking at providing the evidence on added therapeutic value at the same time, in the same way. And all this is integrated to a point we have not discussed in all this comparison of reviews. We haven't discussed how we harmonize at the time of development. And I think that's a very important point. And maybe ICMRA was also successful because it impacted at the time when companies were still doing their trials. So we were doing the same trial for everybody. We were having the same criteria. So we're not multiplying the development plans. We are reducing the impact on companies. So we are speeding up also the development. The evaluation is a small part of the time for the development of a product and successful putting on the market, placing on the market. It's actually the development itself which is the longest. So working in scientific advice or the discussion on the different types of meeting at FDA is quite important. And open is also opening at that time. So providing the help at the time of development for collaborative development, collaborative assessment. And that continues with the health technology assessment. And we have now very well established processes, which is speeding up the access for patients.
Okay. Well, one more question, then I'll hand over to Kim. Angelo, can you just comment on this point? Because you and Rick have done a brilliant job getting the Orbis program off the mark, and it's obviously very busy. But are you faced with challenges from different opinions when you have so many countries involved?
Thanks for the question. First, I like to echo Agnes's comments that these are really, I think having multiple participants enrich the review experience. You get different perspectives that a review team might not have considered. So I think overall it has, the experience has been positive for our reviewers. I mean, they're typically reviewing data sets and study reports. You have, I think the various comments that we receive overall have been very helpful towards the completion of the assessment. With regards to the number of agencies, I mean, we're always FDA is the coordinator for Orbis. We always encourage the companies, when we identify an application, please to try to submit to the maximum number of countries as possible, because we know that the more countries participating, I think this will be better, I think, from an overall public health perspective of getting multiple opinions.
Thank you, Angelo. Kim, let me hand over to you. Do you want to choose one? We've got some excellent questions coming in here.
Sure, we sure do. Thanks, John. While we have Angela, I do want to ask a question, because one of the issues, and I think perhaps this is related to the Orient 11 ODAC, is the idea that drug development really starts very early, and it's not really the review of the pivotal study that is critical. Of course, it is imperative. And so my question is, in this new world in which we have to coordinate the study's design, for example, the endpoint, the comparator, and so forth, where does that discussion occur, and how would different agencies in different countries be able to evaluate this data set if there was no input or no guidance about the appropriate comparator, the appropriate endpoint, the appropriate statistical plan, and so forth? Does that occur? Is Orbis at the pre-IND stage now, or how does that work on a practical basis as we see the success and the utility of this? And I think as people are developing novel ideas and so forth, how would they how would they go about including an Orbis perspective in their strategic planning?
Yeah, so I think I wanted to clarify. Right now, Orbis is primarily focused at the marketing application stage. Wherein like the trials have been completed and we're in the process of evaluating the results and various aspects prior to marketing. I think you bring up a good point. Like the Orbis or the collaborative concept could be extended to other settings, including the pre-marketing area. But that is sort of, I think, a bit more challenging in regards to the timing of advice. For example, again, like that companies often will approach FDA first with regards to design of registrational trials. I mean, there are mechanisms to get, for example, parallel advice from FDA and EMA, but this just adds to I think the meeting and timelines wherein the agencies are able to provide advice. So right now, regarding as Ulrich mentioned in his talk, like the cluster concept, I think is where we see operationally where these like early development issues such as the design of the trial, selection of endpoints are being discussed, but not truly more advanced in that cluster mechanism.
Thanks, Angelo. Let me go to some of the questions that have come up. The first one that's had the most upvotes is a specific, have approvals in other countries that resulted from the Orbis collaboration been exactly the same as in the US in terms of the indication wording or other issues regarding the label? So again, the question is specifically about Orbis and the approvals in the other countries. Is the label the same essentially?
Sure, happy to take this question. I think as mentioned at a conclusion of my talk, we've had a total of about 150 regulatory actions now. And the concordance rate is about 95% regards to the type of action, approval or non-approval taken. But there have been instances where there could be differences in the indication wording, for example. And this is where I think is an example of how different regulatory authorities might interpret the results of a trial. I mean, one thing though, Dr. Pazzo said there is always some subjectivity when you're dealing with a marketing application. And it's actually better to discuss these things while you all have the applications under review. Orbis is not designed to have exactly the same wording and action as FDA, but I think it's that spirit and the experience of the collaboration that occurs that allows us to better understand like what are the differing regulatory considerations and even framework that led to those differences in decision.
Great. Again, I think there was a second question, again, related to Orbis. It would be good to see or hear the experience of Orbis from the industry perspective. And again, I think that's a great point. I don't know if there's anybody currently on the panel, John, if you know specifically of any industry examples of Project Orbis.
No, I don't. I saw this coming up, and it's one of the things that makes me wish we were all in a big room together, because you and I, Kim, could push that straight on to somebody from industry. But obviously that's very, very clear. I thought Ulrich's presentation was very encouraging in terms of looking as though the both Orbis and Access were working. But I don't know, Ulrich, do you want to comment on that? Have you got any specific feedback from?
Yes, we did actually. We do have at Swissmedic what we call regulatory roundtables. So participants from the pharmaceutical industry and we come together at a table. We discuss certain topics that are of interest for both sides. And Orbis is, of course, one of those. And I can only summarize it as great interest into Orbis, that the pharmaceutical industry is looking at that, is looking at the key performance indices, if you wish. There is, as I mentioned, great interest in that, and we saw a lot of attention for Orbis, also from our for our partners from the academia as well, but certainly from the drug company perspective as well. Yeah.
That's very helpful. Thank you. If I could ask another question of Agnes, I spent many years on the UK's assessment mechanism, and there were very few oncologists. For a while, I was the only one. And when it was very easy for a panel to agree on safety issues, but effectiveness was very conflicting. And if you have a committee that has cardiologists, respiratory physicians, geriatricians, and so on, when you present an application for cancer of the pancreas, where somebody's claiming extension of life of a matter of weeks, the committee would groan. You mentioned that with ICMRA, the only issue that, well, not the only issue, but one of the issues that came up was quite disparity in considering the level of effectiveness. This was with the COVID vaccines. And I can absolutely understand that, because the data was being delivered and being looked at on an ongoing basis. But is that a cultural thing? Was that different societies, or was that more scientific?
Honestly, considering the differences that were under discussion, I think it was more a cultural than anything, because nobody knew what would be the effectiveness of the vaccine. So, you know, requiring 50%, the concern at EMA was, are we going to reject a vaccine if it's at 48% effectiveness? Is that what we're trying to say to the people who are waiting for vaccines? And we said, let's see the result. Yes, everybody would like the highest possible level of effectiveness, but if it's just below an artificial figure, we're not going to reject. That was more it. If it's 10%, we're probably going to say no. But if it's, you know, just below 50, that probably we should discuss. We should see safety. We should see what does it mean in terms of lethal and serious COVIDs. That was a discussion. So an open door for discussion rather than a closed door saying if it's not 50%, it's nothing. But this was maybe cultural in the way we approach the problem. I don't think it was a fundamental difference. And we were really talking about similar levels of effectiveness as something that we would like to see. As I said, the good surprise was we got much more. When we discussed remdesivir, there was no real discussion in terms of differences of approach. And I think later on, we had some discussion on convalescent plasma, on other products for COVID, because again, as I said, we were discussing COVID here. And there were some differences of views, but it was also linked to some application made in some countries and not in others. So, but we tried to share this information and explain the reason. And I think that was the most important, is to say, listen, you may take a different decision, but at least you understand why we have said yes, or we said maybe, or we said no, because we have had this discussion. And the interesting part was getting more contribution to that discussion. Yes, but have you thought about this? Have you discussed that? And having this group discussion was actually enriching everybody.
That's very reassuring. Of course, in oncology, we'd be thrilled if the baseline was 50%. That would be rather better. For people listening in, if you missed it, I'm reminded just to highlight in session 1, Dan O'Connor from the MHRA in the UK described a new assessment mechanism, a scheme that the UK have developed since Brexit called ILAP, the Innovative Licensing and Access Pathway. And for those of you interested, that's worth going back to. They've linked up with Orbis, and they're particularly linked up with health technology assessment, which addresses the point that I've just been asking Agnes. Yap Favez asked a question here. Orbis partners are also partner in ICMRA. While ICMRA is based on sharing, Orbis is non-sharing. Does this raise issues within ICMRA or Orbis? Angelo, do you want to have a go at that? Or Agnes first, maybe?
Well, the same, yeah. No, it didn't raise any issues because it's a choice that you make. And again, as I said, we were not discussing. ICMRA was discussing in the context of public health crisis. So again, urgent decisions were needed. And maybe on oncology, I'm not saying that it's not urgent, but you may have a little more time to discuss and to see what are the issues. But they were not compared, they were not contrasted. So this discussion didn't take place as the place where maybe I can also just take this opportunity to say that for the open, in principle, every single country is participating. There is no discussion. It's not. And when companies are informed this is an open project, and therefore that by default every one of the authorities are participating. Just to answer one question.
Angela, do you have a comment on that?
Sure, so happy to comment on that. So regarding, I think the Orbis does require the company to provide an authorization for us really to share key several aspects of the application, including certain for new molecular entities. This is extended to include product quality information. Now, there are other mechanisms for FDA to share our assessments. I mean, our drugs at FDA often will list like the basis for approval, including several, including the reviews for new molecular entities. However, several of these reviews could be heavily redacted, particularly the CMC sections, wherein we've heard feedback from other agencies that that it's good that those assessments are available online are in the public domain. However, because of the amount of redaction, we cannot make sense anymore of like what's being said in this review due to the heavy amount of redaction. And I think that's why where I think Orbis comes into play, where we're able to share several of these key review documents with minimal redaction.
Thank you very much. Kim, back to you.
Yeah, I wanted to get back to Agnes's comment about open and the COVID experience. And one of the things we haven't chatted a lot about, but I think it's important for us is the diagnostic testing, genetic testing, and the potential harmonization opportunities there. Some of the molecularly targeted agents require this testing to be done, and that seems to be quite a challenge in these different regions. The acceptance of a uniform test for the marketing indication and so forth. Agnes, can you comment about the testing harmonization, or was there progress made there as far as a more global perspective?
I'm not maybe competent, as you know. I'm not an oncologist, and I've not followed necessarily the assessment of oncology product, but I guess my colleagues at EMA could answer better. But EMA has a limited scope of activities. It's only medicines in the sense of drug, biologics, and vaccines. It's not dealing with diagnostics and ex vivo diagnostics and testing. So this is where we have recognized the problem of testing when it is linked to the activity of the product. This is a very difficult regulatory question for us because our authority does not extend to that, and we need to liaise with the other authorities in charge of devices or So not a good answer. Sorry.
Well, thanks. So again, with the Office of Excellence or Center for Excellence in Oncology, I think that recognition that the devices or testing were essential for some of these products. And I don't know if Angela, if you have any comments about Orbis and the utility of the Orbis mechanism to highlight the need or the opportunities for genetic testing, other types of companion tests within the review of these products.
Yes, as you know, I think when we last looked about probably a quarter or third of approvals have some element of like a diagnostics test involved with regards to selection of the patients. With Orbis discussion, we discussed this with various with assessment of the clinical trial. This will be included in the discussion, whether it's a pre-specified analyses or some subgroup analyses according to certain biomarkers. But with regards to the regulatory framework of how the various agencies will handle this, again, this is where I think just the differences in framework globally makes it challenging really to have a fully collaborative mechanism for this assessment. Like for FDA, we would be advised, for example, a device company to go ahead and submit, to plan to submit a a pre-marketing authorization, a PMA, which is the equivalent of a marketing application for a device, whereas that framework just does not apply to several countries.
Thanks, Angelo. Let's move on to some of the other questions that have come up. Move to Daniel Martin asked, is scientific advice given by one of the participating agencies on Project Orbit taken into consideration, or is does it have to be accepted by all the participating agencies? Again, I think it reflects the structure of Orbis. Maybe Angelo, you can comment on that.
Sure, and or could probably comment on this as well. I mean, the advice and discussions that we have in our Project Orbis, again, it's we recognize that each regulatory agency has the independence with the final regulatory decision. So they can the participating countries are welcome to take or reject whatever hypotheses or other discussion points that are discussed at the meetings. Or Richard, do you have anything to our regards to how we handle various opinions within an application?
Great. There's a new question, and I want to bring this to the top because it's an issue that we hadn't stressed a lot, which is the role of patients and the patient perhaps advocacy role in these international harmonization efforts. Question specific, I would be interested to hear how patients are involved in the developments as stakeholders. Are there opportunities for them to be heard or participate in any of these processes?
Yes, I'll take this. I think that's a great suggestion, something that we could always benefit for some of our programs for engaging various patient communities. I mean, our experience on this has been prior to the pandemic, when we were able to attend our large conferences, where FDA often sponsors a patient advocate session at one of the larger meetings, such as ASCO or ASH, and also an international, which could include patient advocates from other countries. And the feedback we receive from them is that, why does it take so long for us to get access for some of these therapies? And I think that feedback that we were receiving early on, as we were thinking about Orbis, I think really fostered the development of the program, that the mission of the OCE is broader than just patients in the US. We consider advancement of cancer care in the world, with advancement of standards of care would be of benefit for global public health.
Right.
Can I just make a comment on that, Angelo? Because the CDDF are very committed to trying to include patients and to promote the concept of including the patient's perspective. And I know after 50 years of being involved in treating patients with cancer, obviously their opinions should count. But one of the greatest challenges, and I'm sorry Roger Wilson, who asked that question, can't join in discussion because he's a great patient advocate. We have found it very difficult to find the appropriate level of patient advocacy, because by every definition, they're the most biased people that you could possibly inquire of. And their needs are always represented very strongly, very forcefully. But if you have people representing, we had some very powerful discussions yesterday about pediatric oncology. And there, of course, the advocates are usually parents, not even the patient. People advocating to put brain cancer higher up the list than pancreatic cancer, and so on and so forth. So I think it's a great challenge to all of us involved in drug development to know how best to involve patient advocacy at every level. And I welcome any suggestion we can have. And I see Agnes is coming in on this.
Yeah, having worked on rare disease, pediatrics, and patient involvement, I think we need to integrate the patient positioned in all our work from all over the life cycle. We cannot just include them at the end when we discuss the approval or the rejection. That's too late. That's not the right way. They need to be involved first and foremost for me during the development, when we decide on the trial, the criteria, the endpoints, and so on. I think this is really the essential and what we're trying to achieve through scientific advice and evaluation at EMA. We need to learn from the COVID experience on agility, because we all struggle with the workload, and this collaboration is actually good, but is taking far more resources than just working on our own in our corner. That is asking for far more work and far more people to do this. So let's learn from what we've achieved to see where we can, cut dead wood and do something more efficient. But one thing we've learned is there is never one patient. There are actually multiple patients with different views. That's also the richness of the discussion. It's to bring more than one to the table. So we don't have the patient excuse, but we have representatives of different views, contradicting views, and trying to bring them together to make the best out of it. It seems a lot of words, but I think this is by engaging all over the life cycle that we can transform the situation progressively.
Those are very helpful comments. I've certainly myself learned a lot from following the activities of the pediatric community, the PSYOP group. But again, it's very strange. I mean, to distinguish patient advocacy from lobbying is difficult in setting priorities. We've got two questions being put forward that might be interrelated. One is to ask in these collaborative efforts if there's any appetite for artificial intelligence and digital technologies, and it's linked with a very adventurous question, which is naughtily anonymous. I'd much rather know who's asking this, but looking forward 10 years from now, what kind of review or collaboration would be the best for patients globally? So I'm bringing that in because one of the issues that's come up earlier in the meeting is the challenge that if you do international clinical trials, to make sure that, and by definition, those are decentralized, to make sure that you capture complete and good quality data is a huge challenge and is being faced by AI. So does anyone want to comment on the use of digital technologies and where we might be globally in 10 years' time? That's hugely ambitious. Ulrich, do you want to have a shot at that?
Yeah, it's probably the hardest one. So, Agnes, you want to say something first?
Sure. I like to think in 10 years anyway. I will be wrong, so it doesn't matter because we're all wrong when we try to predict the future. So, but I think we are changing. The AI is already there, so we need to use it for what it brings us. We need to learn because it's still new, especially for regulators. It's a bit frightening. But this is something we have to use because there is no way we are going to stay away from this. So let's use it for what it brings, for the capacity to manage data. I think in addition, what we need, and that was my point initially also, is we need to break this stupid confidentiality, and we need to be able to share data because we will then be able to assess whether the data of quality. So we need to collect good quality data, and we need to share the data freely in the interest of public health so we can maximize the use. And AI will help us use the data, generate data, and work better together. Now, there is also an element of quality of data is important, but we need to really change the way we think about data. In addition, you mentioned the fact that multinational trials, for the time being, realistically, we have very different level of development in the world, and cancer access doesn't exist in many areas still in the world for many patients. So there is a progress to be done. So we need to be also working maybe with two speeds at the same time, not leaving anybody out, but at the same time recognizing that the priorities for some countries and regions are not the same as the one for the US or EU or Japan, because we are rich, because we can access, we can give, even if all patients don't have access yet. In contrast, we are talking about even not having access for acute leukemia in children in Africa, where we know it's a curable disease, and this will happen 20 years or 30 years in Europe or in the US. So we have to
cater for these differences, not imagine that we will do one single trial that will solve every problem. So maybe work on the different ways of collecting data, but I see AI and data sharing as really I can't say it in English. We cannot avoid going there, and this will be our daily business. Over.
That's very kind. That's very good. Ulrich, we're not letting you off the hook here.
Sure, absolutely. So first of all, I share what Agnes just told us. I might want to give an additional point for consideration. If you think in the era of oncology, and if you think on about the revolution in terms of the diagnostics we just touched based upon, when we think about deep sequencing and the possibilities how a single tumor now has different genetic aberrations, it will be very difficult in the future to perform certain trials because there are just not enough patients available. And I think artificial intelligence has to help us in selecting similar patient populations that are similar with regards to certain genetic aberrations. And I do not mean n equals 1. I mean n equals more than 1, much more than 1, because we can assume that the single drug or drug combinations might behave very, very differently in these kind of patient clusters, different patient clusters within one entity. And if you think of 10 years ago, we said non-small cell or small cell lung cancer. And we know by today that within even a non-small cell lung cancer, there are at least 10 different cancer subtypes there, and they behave just very differently. Maybe that's just one thought. I don't know if that's helpful, but I think artificial intelligence might help us to guide or to have certain algorithms to even have patient populations within one entity, within one cancer entity available for inclusion.
It's very helpful, and I completely agree. I mean, I'm sure the way society, well, to pick up on Agnes's point, the global disparity in healthcare is obviously a huge factor in globalization of clinical trials, leave alone access. So that's a whole area. But I'm sure the way society is moving, the issue that we globally call quality of life, of what patients actually want most when they've got a diagnosis of cancer, is going to become increasingly scientific. I think we're developing methods of actually finding out what patients really believe, think, and want in a way which even 10, 20 years ago, the doctors thought they knew, or the nurses thought they knew what patients wanted, and so on and so forth. So I think CDDF have had conferences on patient-reported outcomes in the past. And personally, I think where AI might help us most in a cross-cultural sense is to develop technologies where we can actually get robust data on what patients really think. And that's going to help hugely to bridge the gap between regulation and health technology assessment or providers. Enough from me. Kim, back to you.
Yeah, thanks, Sean. Again, I think the comments about the patient advocates and their role is critical. I do want to mention that a key feature for many of these conferences is patient education, advocacy education, and I think some of the best talks I've heard at drug development forums here and at the AAADV were advocates that would look at the data and not advocate for an outcome for the assessment, but to advocate for quality data to inform all of us, because that we all benefit from that. So I do think that in this forum and in others, and I appreciate at least my knowledge of the US FDA significant office dedicated to patient advocates, participation in high quality training for these advocates, which makes a big difference. So it's good to hear that, and I think that's an ongoing opportunity to provide that. Again, with the digital technology available, these types of conferences, more virtual training for advocates is available. And we are developing a enduring materials curriculum for patient advocates to understand the nuts and bolts of drug development, which I think was a key element for the advocacy perspective, in which high quality data, high quality evidence is really the foundation for benefit for all of us going forward. So just to plug, to continue these types of forums and include even the advocacy community and the appropriate leadership, because their leadership and knowledge will benefit all of us, particularly in accruals, et cetera. Other questions we'll go to, what are the main challenges in some of the other collaborative efforts shared, particularly when it comes to new treatment modalities and digital technologies? Again, I don't know if anybody wants to take that on. I do know that, Agnes, you mentioned the sort of personal privacy issues. I know that has emerged to be quite significant, and certainly the value of anonymized data that we could all benefit from is certainly there. But I think that this divide between individuals' perception that their data is not secure, particularly the European view versus the US view, is something that I think is potentially challenging. Again, Agnes, I don't know if the COVID experience provided any enlightenment in sharing data, personal data from patients that you could share.
Unfortunately, I would say no. I think we have a very thorough legislation on personal data in Europe, which is proving really a hurdle for data that need to be shared in the context of public health. It's not appropriate for this context. We've tried to explain that. For the time being, it's a bit difficult to be heard, and I think I find very surprising that we're told that to protect the patient, you cannot share information that would be useful to another, in theory, to protect against a theoretical risk of misuse of data. Regulatory agency between themselves cannot share safety data about to protect other patients. So that I don't find the logic here. That's a personal view, of course, as you can imagine, but I think we need to say when things don't make sense. And in this case, they don't make sense. Now, I think the future is to be able to share data, good quality data, and to be able to work. I think what we have with the clusters, and it was mentioned by Ulrich, we have more than 30 clusters with more than 6 or up to 12 participants. This is a very good basis for this exchange, for sharing data, for getting together and harmonizing and working in the same direction. However, this information is not shared outside of the cluster, and many regulatory agencies would benefit just to receive that information. Again, we are faced with confidentiality issues, so we need to work around this to share more information. And certainly new technologies, both in terms of technologies as medicines, as treatment, and technologies to share information are useful and should be the focus, because it's the future. Over.
Thanks, Agnes. Let's go back to the questions. The question here at the top is, can you comment on how agencies can come to a different conclusion in Orbis, with all agencies approving versus one rejecting the indication? Again, I'll start, but I know that Ulrich may have a perspective that he may want to bring, and I'll call upon him. But for example, for uncommon diseases, pediatric indications, a molecular subtype, there may be only the opportunity to do a single global study, and the FDA or the EMA might have a different conclusion based on that, based on the endpoint chosen or the comparator arm and so forth. So for a non-Orbis trial, I could see how different agencies might have different conclusions. Within Orbis, which again potentially is an improvement, because all of the participants can see all of the data at the same time and have an opportunity to discuss it. It might minimize that, but I don't know, Ulrich, if you have a thought or comment about that specific conundrum.
Sure. So I think Orbis, as I mentioned in the talk, is not about the same decision to be made for all agencies. It is to really reflect the the risks and benefits of the drug, have a very good baseline understanding on the data, and then every single agency makes their own conclusion out of it. And that single decision per agency, that has to do with different things. If you have not a randomized controlled trial, and this is very often the case in oncology, that there is just a single arm trial basically, or even only a cohort with a few patients, you have high uncertainty. For this application, you do have high uncertainty because you do not have a built-in comparator. And therefore, it might at the end come to the point where each and every agency has to take their own decision what to accept, how high the uncertainty might or can be. So this is one point. The second point is basically that there might be different perspectives when it comes to the indication as such. As we know, we can have the metastatic situation or the adjuvant situation, meaning you potentially have already a cured patient that you give something on top to prevent the cancer from regrowth or potential cancer from regrowth. And so in the adjuvant setting, for example, you give a drug and you add a certain toxicity for potentially cured patient, right? So it is very different. And I think this is what we observe sometimes, how the overall survival curves look, how they behave, if they are superimposable or not, and if the surrogate for overall survival is accepted by an agency. So these are very clear examples why and how agencies might come, based on the same data, might come to different conclusions.
Yeah, thanks, Ulrich. That was great. Angela, you may want to comment too from the other side of the table.
Sure. I think again, what Orbis brings to the table is really the opportunity for more sort of a real-time discussion of issues with an application. We generally would select the most straightforward ones for Orbis, but I've also been pushing the teams like, what's the issue with why can't we discuss like more controversial application? Because that's where I think the differing opinions would also be helpful. Due to workload consideration, for example, we would not refer any application that's going to an advisory committee to for Orbis, for example. But these are sort of examples where I think the more that we have worked with each other, I think the more comfortable we are with regards to sharing our opinions, our various perspectives, and this is within an environment of like we respect each other's like perspectives on this and various perhaps various region-specific considerations or clinical trial considerations that are taken into account. And in the end, like prior to Orbis, like what we've heard is that often like the other smaller regulatory agencies will ask the applicant, the company, like, why did the FDA or EMA arrive at this decision? Like, and they will ask us, and when we get asked that question, often it could be like a year behind. It's very hard to remember, and we're certain like major aspects of the application. So having the opportunity to ask these questions live while the application is reviewed, I think is of important value for several regulatory agencies.
Thanks, Angelo. Let me read the next question here for Ulrich. Shortening of assessment times and collaboration procedures, is the time to actual approval decision reduced to a similar degree? And Ulrich, I'll let you answer that, and then I'll turn this over to John again to finish us up.
Yeah, it's a great question, and maybe I was not clear enough in the talk, but the calculation I've showed you was actually until the decision for approval. So the answer is yes. It really was the time for the access within Switzerland was significantly shortened by 33%. Yes.
Well, thank you very much. We've almost used our hour. We've time for one more question, and this goes to Agnes. Regarding open, is the MAH informed about the non-EU regulatory agencies involved in a specific CHMP assessment?
Yes, they are, but by default, it's every one of the one involved in open. We don't make a selection, and we don't ask the company if they want some countries and not others. Of course, the company may not submit to some of the agency, but we have shared the application in that case. In open, we work with an umbrella confidentiality arrangement, which allow us to share everything with the other authorities. So we don't have to ask for a letter every time. We don't have to make a specific case. It's in principle, we can share everything, and we did.
Fine, thank you very much indeed. Well, our hour is up. I think on behalf of Kim, I'd like to just say a few thank yous, and then we'll hand it over to Jaap to close the whole meeting. But firstly, thank you, Kim, for helping share this very good Q&A session with me. And particularly, obviously, thank you to all the speakers. This has been one of the best sessions, and there is so much dynamic activity going on that it really is very exciting. And I'm still thrilled to be part of CDDF, because I think our mission is getting reinforced by everything we discuss. It's a very dynamic situation. There have been lessons learned from COVID. It's not all been bad. And it looks to me as though the opportunities for intelligent collaboration are greater than ever before, but it's adding complexity alongside the fact that new medical entities, the science, is giving us increasingly complex problems. Ulrich mentioned lung cancer, breast cancer is now 12 different diseases. We're going to have a workshop later in the year on drug agnostic developments and so on and so forth. So it's absolutely a question of watch this space. But thank you very much indeed. I'd like to take this opportunity of thanking the organizing committee for this whole 3-day session, especially Jaap, who is in charge. I think it's been really exciting. I'm also thanking Michael and the technical staff and our office staff for helping behind the scenes, because although we're all learning to get better and better at this, you do need experts behind the screen to make sure it all works, and it seems to have done. We've had a very large attendance, and for those of you interested, the numbers will be available later on. So thank you very much indeed. I feel that it is probably a more exciting time than ever to be involved in trying to get these new molecules available to patients, but we're never going to be short of the challenges. So with that, I'll close this session and hand us back to Jaap to close the whole annual meeting.
Thank you, John, and thank you for Kim and Agnes and Ulrich and Angelo for what I felt was a truly fascinating last session. And I have a little bit more work for those of you behind your screen at home or wherever you are, which is on the next slide. I enjoyed the session, but we want to know whether you enjoyed them as well. And just as to keep you actively involved at this point in time, here's another poll. This will be the final one. Can you just give us 3 keywords or 3 aspects of the topics that you would like to express as liking the most at this CDDF annual meeting? As I said, you can insert 3 different topics there. Let's give you a minute to answer this question. Innovation. A regulatory perspective. We will absolutely take everything you indicate there into account in the way that we organize our future meetings. We try to learn from all of our meetings and improve continuously. So whatever feedback you can give us is really appreciated. Inclusive and open. Collaboration. Well, this is truly very helpful, and we appreciate you for this feedback. Michael, let's go to the final slide. Hopefully you will have a few more minutes after we close the meeting in total to fill out the survey and help us further with further details. You can find the survey on the homepage of the meeting platform, where it says Event Home on the left part of the page. If you click on that button, a page will open, and if you scroll down to the bottom of the page, there's a block there that says Event Info, and there is a line there, Share Your Feedback. If you push on that button, Share Your Feedback, you enter a survey, and we would really appreciate your feedback in that survey. It just takes a few minutes of your time to fill it out, and it helps us tremendously. Well, here I would like to echo John in thanking not only the speakers of the last session, but all speakers of the whole meeting, but also the moderators. I would absolutely like to thank my colleagues at the program committee, Roger Wilson, Michael Zayak, Claudia Hay, and Kim Lyerly. And I would certainly like to echo what John said for the excellent support that we had from Magdalena and from Michael. For your information, on the next slide, we have more activities to come up. I will save this for the last, but the next activity that we will have is on February 24th, so only 15 days from now, which will be a webinar from Chris Wergen on minimal residual disease in AML, which should be an appetizer for our next workshop that will be on April 25 and 26 in Amsterdam on minimal residual disease and circulating DNA. I said Amsterdam. The Netherlands is just announced that it's going to open up and will basically lift all limitations to COVID that we had. So hopefully we will indeed be able to organize that meeting in Amsterdam and see you there in person, although we also will enable virtual participation. It will be a hybrid meeting. Also, our next annual meeting will be a hybrid meeting. We will also have a webinar in March, on March 16, that I certainly would like to draw your attention to. That's with Dr. Peter Liese, who is member of the European Parliament, and he was member of the BECA committee, and he will dwell on the perspectives of the European Parliament on the execution of their EU Beating Cancer plan. So that's going to be a fascinating webinar for sure. And as it is indicated on this slide, our next annual meeting, again, that we will organize in a hybrid way, but we would really favor in-person attendance, will be next year on February 6 to 8, hopefully in Noordwijk aan Zee in the Netherlands. Having said that, thank you very much for your participation. Enjoy the rest of your day, and we truly hope to see you back on one of our next CDDF initiatives and meetings. Thank you so much, and have a wonderful day.